We have talked about the etiology, the pathogenesis, clinical features, signs and symptoms, and how do we diagnose a patient with myelofibrosis with the help of labs and the bone marrow exam. Now let's look at what are the treatment options we have after we have diagnosed a patient with thrombocytosis, essential thrombocytosis. How can we help that patient? Now, to start off, let's talk about what are the high risk factors for thrombotic or hemorrhagic events in these patients. What are the various important things which we have to look for in a patient that can cause, and we have to stratify the patients based on these risk factors that these patients can have either a thrombotic or a hemorrhagic event. The important risk factors are an old patient, specifically a patient whose age is greater than 60 years. Most of the patients presenting with essential thrombocytosis are older patients with greater than 60 years of age. Now, if the patient previously has a history of thrombosis, for example, if the patient has had some type of arterial occlusion or venous thrombus TVT, then that patient is also a high-risk patient. Similarly, if the platelet count is in millions, for example, in 1.5 million per microliters of blood, then that is also a very high risk factor for a hemorrhagic event or a thrombotic event. Generally, a platelet count just above a million, for example, 1.1 million, 1.2 million is a risk factor for hemorrhagic. But as we go upwards of greater than 1.5 million or 2 millions, then the thrombotic events can also come into the picture because of increased coagulation or increased pooling of the platelet count, which leads to a problem in the flow of the blood. Similarly, obesity, which is also a risk factor for other diseases, is also a very important risk factor for this essential thrombocytosis. Any other cardiovascular risk factors, for example, a history of angina or hypertension or renal disease, is also an important thing to consider in these patients. Any marker of hypercoagulability, for example, any other problem with the coagulation profile of these patients, for example, someone who had a previous platelet disorder or underlying von Willebrand disease or any other hypercoagulable profile. For example, in females who are using OCPs, they can be marked under a hypercoagulable state. So these are all the important risk factors which we should keep in mind. And finally, if we have a patient with a positive JAK2 mutation, for example, the JAK2 V617F mutation, then the patients presenting with that mutation are generally high risk and they have a worse form of the disease as compared to the other types of patients. So these are the important risk factors which we should keep in mind while treating the patient. And if a patient has any of these risk factors, then we should be very prompt and very aggressive with our therapy and keep that patient under close observation. Now let's talk about how do we treat those patients. What can we help? Start off the lifestyle modifications, which are the basics for every other thing. Similarly, the important drugs which we use in these patients are the cytoreductive therapies. One important drug is aspirin. How do we use aspirin is also very important, which we are going to talk about in the coming slides. The astute use of aspirin, because aspirin should be used very carefully. It can help these patients by preventing the thrombosis, but on the other hand, it can also lead to an increased bleeding risk in this patient. So we have to be very clear-cut in our instruction on use of aspirin in these patients. The other types of cytoreductive therapies which are used either in combination with aspirin or without aspirin are the hydroxyurea. Hydroxyurea is a very good drug and very commonly used in these patients. And the mechanism of hydroxyurea, which is basically utilized in these patients, is because hydroxyurea can lead to an increase in the nitric oxide release. So that increase in nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator, can be helpful in these patients to establish the flow of blood and to prevent the thrombotic picture or the thrombotic complications. Aspirin, as we talked about, in low doses is very helpful. Other types of immunomodulators or other types of cytotoxic drugs like busulfan, they have been used to mixed clinical results. Anagrelide, which is basically a megakaryocyte inhibitor, it has also been tried and tested in a lot of patients, and it helped a lot of patients because it prevents the proliferation of the megakaryocytes. So if we have a very high platelet count, then anagrelide can be used either in combination with aspirin on its own to help those patients. But if we compare the data of hydroxyurea with anagrelide, then hydroxyurea has a better toxicity profile as compared to anagrelide. in treating the essential thrombocytosis. So anagrelide has been used historically, but mostly it has been largely replaced by hydroxyurea along with the aspirin. Interferon alpha has also been used, or the PEG alpha historically has also been used with a mixed result. Similarly, certain types of phosphorus products like the phosphorus P32 has also been used. So the important ones here to keep in mind are the hydroxyurea, aspirin in low dose, or in certain high-risk patients we might have to increase the dose, and anagrelide, which is a platelet inhibitor or the megakaryocyte inhibitor. Now, to treat these patients, we stratify them based on their risk factors, which we talked about in the previous slides, into either a very low risk factor patients, low risk factors category, intermediate risk factor category, and a high risk factor category. Let's talk about the very low and the low risk category. If the patients don't have the important risk factors which we talked about in the previous slide, then those are classified into the very low and the low risk disease. The very low risk disease generally involves the patient which have a no history of thrombosis. They are younger patients with less than 60 years of age, and there is no mutation of the JAK2 or the MPL, the receptor of the thrombopoietin gene. In those patients, specifically if there is no cardiovascular risk in this patient, if they don't have any history of hypertension or any other cardiovascular abnormality, then the important thing or the only thing you have to do is observe those patients over a period of time. Just observe these patients with regular clinical visits, and if they then develop other risk factors, then we can go on and start treating them based on the risk factor profile. If these patients have cardiovascular risk factors, for example, if they have a history of hypertension, obesity, and other cardiovascular profiles, then once daily aspirin is good enough for these patients. You don't have to do anything else. Just put them on aspirin and then observe them over a period of time so that their symptoms get better, or either their risk factors get worse or better. So for very low risk disease, you either observe the patients without any cardiovascular risk factor, or in patients with cardiovascular risk factors, you have to give once daily aspirin. Aspirin should be avoided in extreme thrombocytosis, for example, in the platelet count in millions, and in cases of acquired von Willebrand syndrome, which can be as a result of an increased platelet count, or it can be a disease on its own. So this is a very important point to understand in these patients, that you don't give aspirin to the patient who have a platelet count in millions, for example, 1.5 million. It's a very important risk factor, and that the patient have a very high risk of hemorrhage, especially if you give aspirin to these patients. Now, the low risk disease is the one which has no history of thrombocytosis, the age is less than 60, but there is a mutation of either a JAK2 or an MPL pathway. So that mutation basically differentiates very low risk disease category from a low risk disease category. In these patients, if we have no cardiovascular risk factor, then once daily or twice daily aspirin is good enough for these patients, depending on their overall profile. And if we have a history of cardiovascular risk factors with these patients, then twice daily aspirin is the standard therapy for these patients. So basically the aspirin dosage is different. Once daily aspirin is good enough for the patients with no cardiovascular risk category. On the other hand, in very low risk disease category, without any cardiovascular risk factor, we just had to observe the patients. But aspirin is a standard drug for low risk disease patients. The dosage is differentiated, basically dependent on the cardiovascular profile of the patient, whether the patient has hypertension, angina, or any other risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And once again, it is also very important that even though if the patients have cardiovascular risk factors, if the platelet count is very high, for example, in millions, or if the patient has an acquired von Willebrand syndrome, you do not give aspirin to these patients, because those patients have a very high risk of bleeding. So this important point should be kept in mind while we treat the patients, be it depending on their cardiovascular or non-cardiovascular profile. If we have patients with intermediate risk disease, for example, they have one or two risk factors positive for the disease. For example, we have a patient who does not have a history of thrombosis, but he is an older patient with greater than 60 years of age, and the JAK2 or the MPL is unmutated. Age is a very strong risk factor because most of the patients are elderly patients, specifically the elderly females. So if we have an older patient with an intermediate risk factors, what do we do is these patients, if he or she does not have any cardiovascular risk, then twice daily aspirin is our therapy of choice. And along with that, if that twice daily aspirin does not help, And if the patient, or either the patient has some bleeding tendency, then we might combine hydroxyurea and put the aspirin to once daily dosage. So hydroxyurea plus once daily aspirin or either twice daily aspirin is the standard therapy for older patients with intermediate risk factors and if they don't have a cardiovascular risk factor. On the other hand, if the patient has a cardiovascular risk factor, then hydroxyurea plus once daily aspirin is the standard therapy for these patients. So hydroxyurea is generally added to the older patient because it helped us along with the usage of aspirin in preventing the complications of thrombosis in these patients. Now let's move forward to the last part of our treatment slide, which are the basically high-risk disease patients. The high-risk disease patients will either have a history of thrombosis or they will be older patients with greater than 60 years old with JAK2 MPL mutations. So they will have a lot of risk factors positive for the disease. They will have a history of thrombosis, they will be a more older population, and the genetic mutation will also be present. So they are the very high risk category which can develop the thrombotic or the hemorrhagic episodes. In these patients, if they have an arterial thrombosis history at any age, then we have to give them twice daily aspirin along with hydroxyurea. Aspirin and hydroxyurea are basically the arteriolar vasodilators. They prevent the arteriolar circulation. So if we have an arterial thrombus in the patient at any age, be it in the young age or at the extremes of the age, you have to give twice daily aspirin along with hydroxyurea to these patients. If on the other hand, the patients have a venous thrombus history at any age, for example, the patients have a DVT or a Budd-Chiari syndrome or a renal vein problem, in that case, we anticoagulate the patient with systemic anticoagulation with either heparin or warfarin. Along with that, we combine hydroxyurea because hydroxyurea helps us in both ways. It helps us with the arterial circulation and it also helps us with the venous part of the circulation by releasing the nitric oxide. So we either systemically anticoagulate the patient with hydroxyurea or we give the twice daily aspirin along with the hydroxyurea if we have an arterial problem, specifically in the high risk category. If on the other hand, we have a patient, the above discussion was for the patients who do not have any positive risk factors. If we have a mutation of JAK2 or the MPL and a history of thrombosis and elder population on top of it, if we also have cardiovascular risk factor, then it is very important to consider adding once daily aspirin to these patients along with the hydroxyurea and systemic anticoagulation. So for example, if you have a patient with DVT at any age or presently presenting with DVT, he also and he does not have any other cardiovascular risk disease. For example, he does not have angina or hypertension or any other cardiovascular risk factor. Then you will give hydroxyurea along with systemic anticoagulation, heparin or warfarin. Okay. Now, if that patient also develops cardiovascular risk factors, for example, that patient has anginal pain or that patient develops hypertension over a long period of time or other cardiovascular risk profile, then along with hydroxyurea and the systemic anticoagulation, you have to consider adding aspirin to these patients. The addition of aspirin is basically a risk-benefit weightage, whether this patient will benefit, whether we will prevent the thrombotic episodes in this patient. You have to use your clinical judgment to arrive at this diagnosis. So this was a very thorough flowchart describing clear-cut scenarios for the use of various types of drugs, be it in very low-risk category disease patients, low-risk category patients with or without cardiovascular risk factors, in moderate or intermediate risk factors patient, and in high risk factor disease of the patient. This concludes the treatment part of the essential thrombocytosis. With that, we complete our discussion of this topic, essential thrombocytosis. We started off talking about what are the essential features of this disease, what are the overlapping features present in all the types of myeloproliferative disorders, what are the common things, a theme of all these disorders. Then we talked about the etiologies, we talked about relative thrombocytosis, how do we arrive at a differential diagnosis, what are the important clinical features that can help us in our judgment, what are the important labs that we can do, what does the bone marrow profile show, and finally we discussed the important risk factors, and based on these risk factors, how can we stratify the patient in low, intermediate or high risk patients. I hope you have learned something new from this lecture, and I'll see you in another lecture. Thank you.